Welcome in to the Blanket Coverage Podcast. We are back with another episode. Today, we're gonna we're putting our stamp on the football season. We're ending up college football today. We're gonna do a little bit of season recap, talk a little bit about just kind of the general conference outlook for a lot of these Power 5 conferences. Obviously, a lot of turnover in the coaches. A lot of turnover as far as the transfer portal. So we are going to talk about all of it. And then tomorrow, the plan is that tomorrow we are going to do our big Super Bowl preview. We are going to have plenty of gambling picks, player props, touchdown props. I'm even going to make a national anthem prop because I have a platform to just say whatever I want. So I'm going to use that to tell you what to bet on the national anthem over or under. But we are going to break down the game. We're going to get our picks in for the game. And hopefully, I honestly haven't talked to him yet. So I'm going to tease this without, knowing if I'm going to be able to follow through. Hopefully, we're going to have Ryan Bunnell going the distance.
Oh, yeah.
For GTD podcast, founder of GTD Sports, and also diehard Bengals fan. So that should be a good time if we can get him on the pod. But for today, Jack, we're talking about college football, and we never really talked about it. But national championship happened. Georgia happened. Your thoughts on the Georgia Bulldogs winning a national championship?
Well, before we get that hot poker directly seeped into my eyeball, let's mention one thing before we start this, because I just simply think this is hilarious. And of the picks, because I know we've been tracking picks. Don't choke on me. But while Noah recovers, regular season picks, Noah won by 2 games. Conference championship picks, I won by 1 game. Bowl games, we tied. And the New Year's 6 games, I got 1 up over him. And the national championship, we both agreed. So total pick count is 109 to 71 tied, which is kind of remarkable how we both tied exactly is quite the interesting result here. So I have to hand it to you, Noah. It was an excellent season, but kind of remarkable how we ended up tying. But are you good?
Yeah, I'm fine. I had some coffee go down the wrong pipe and briefly lost my shit, so to speak. But we're back. We're fine. That's insane.
Very good.
180 games. We picked 180 games, Jack.
And a lot of them are different. Not everyone, obviously, but a lot are different.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's something I would not have expected. So I have to say hats off to you for I know that we dislike ties in the Blanket Coverage podcast, whether it's in football or whether in anything else. But all I have to say, kind of fitting that we only saw 1 tie across all of football this year. And the second tie was then coming in with us. So
if one of us just picked TCU like 1 fewer times,
that would have been it. If I didn't pick Syracuse 1 fewer time, if I wasn't delusional on Syracuse one of these times, I would have won. So that to me is more painful. But now we can go to our final notes on the conferences. We did it like this last year if you were tuning in then, but we're going to go by the conferences, and we're going to start with the ACC because we're doing this in alphabetical order, and also so we can get it out of the way the fastest. This is quite the interesting conference. They went 2-4 in bowl games, which you may say, wow, that's really bad, but it actually wasn't the worst conference in bowl games, despite their conference talent being bad, but it wasn't the worst. So 2-4, this is a pretty disappointing year so far. And my highlight teams, Wake Forest and Pittsburgh, both of them overperformed expectations. They both had stellar quarterback performances, and they both won their division. So I have to give them both credit for having an admittedly pretty solid season.
Yeah, I mean, those are the two highlights. I was thinking, like, who else can we put on the highlights here? There's not really anyone else. The ACC, I believe I made the comparison. At one point, I was trying to say that the American Conference was better than the ACC. That take didn't exactly pan out. But you look top to bottom, this was not an impressive conference whatsoever. And really, the only other highlight I had here was NC State, who put together a 9-3 season. They beat Clemson at home. They had a really good year for the Wolfpack, and rumor has it they're bringing back a lot of production for next year. So watch out for the Wolfpack in a weakened ACC. Of course, they're not going to have to go up against Sam Hartman or Kenny Pickett, which were the two sort of standout quarterbacks of the conference. But if we want to get into lowlights here, we can talk about Clemson. Clemson fell off last year, and a lot of that was due to the most disappointing quarterback in the conference, DJ Uiagalelei.
Yeah, Clemson was man. Okay, I'm not going to say disaster because if you have a 10-3 season, you did not have a bad season. But for Clemson standards and what they usually expect, this was very obviously very down. And yeah, they finished as a top 14 team, and hooray for that. But it's still pretty interesting. And I get Wake's defense is worse, but Wake scored 307 points this season, and Clemson only mustered 196. Louisville scored 70 more points. And Louisville went 6-7. So I get you guys to play defense too, obviously, but the offense of this Clemson team was really bad. You know who scored the exact same amount of points as Clemson this season in the ACC? Exact same amount.
I'm going to go with, I don't know.
Florida State.
Oh, geez.
You want to know who scored 30 more points than Clemson this year? Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, who went 3-9 and lost to Clemson, admittedly not by much. The game was shockingly close, but yeah, if Georgia Tech's offense can put up 30 more points than you, and you have all 5 stars, at least majority, that's tough. So yeah, Clemson down here. My only other teams to add here was Florida State yet again, even though they didn't really have any expectations this time, but still pretty sad. And then also I put in UNC. Despite Boston College being bad, I didn't put them in only because their main quarterback was out nearly the entire year, Jerkovich. So
yeah, they're also it's not a surprise. It's not a surprise for Boston College to be
and again, the fact they went 6-6 with their starter out the majority of the year, who by the way is a pretty good starter, that's not that bad. So really, I'm not going to knock BC.
UNC was a top 15 team.
Yeah, what happened there? They finished 5th.
They were picked in a lot of cases to win the ACC. It was kind of between them and Clemson.
I thought they were going to do well. I don't think I had them as my Coastal winner, but I thought they would be up there. I mean, not 5th.
I think we can certainly say that the ACC was the most surprising conference last year. I think that's very safe
for good and bad.
For good and bad, yes. It was just the most upside down conference for sure.
But
in terms of just what our preseason expectations were.
The opposite of surprising is at least consistent. And in terms of consistency, we had a conference that also tended to buck that trend a little bit with its normally best team in the conference failing out. And that was the Big 12, who went a really, really strong 6-1 in bowl games. It's actually the best record of any Power 5 team by a wide margin. They're the only team to lose. They were the only conference to lose fewer than 4 games in bowl production, and they had 7 teams go. So got to hand it to the Big 12. They had a really good postseason. The only problem was when it came to some of their top teams going up at least against each other, because when we had Oklahoma State and Baylor, which were obviously about the only two good teams in the Big 12, that game might have been one of the most heinous football games I've watched in a while. The Big 12 championship was a wild game. And not for people who like football. So this is a very strange conference this year. And a conference that's usually kind of uninteresting, at least very mellow of a conference. You get what you think you're going to get. And this year's a little different.
Yeah, it was. And I mean, it all came down to the most exciting, I would say, the most exciting conference championship game with Oklahoma State falling about a foot short, with less than a foot short.
Yeah, see,
Of
exciting
being
doesn't necessarily mean quality, but it was exciting.
Yeah, no, exciting does not mean quality. That was a sloppy conference championship game. There were a lot of turnovers. I mean, props to Baylor. I don't want to say that, but I have to. Props to Baylor. They were able to come away.
I still will say Baylor's top 5 finish may be one of the most overrated top 5 finishes I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, and I would agree with that.
That's really bad. They are not. I mean, if they're a top 5 team, then that means this year was just very mediocre.
Keep in mind, if Spencer Sanders gains 1 more yard on that scramble and gets in the end zone, we don't see Cincinnati in the playoff. We see Oklahoma State versus Alabama. That would have been like an LSU OU type situation. I'm not sure that Oklahoma State has the facilities for that matchup or had last season at least. We're seeing a lot of coaching turnover at Oklahoma State. Their defensive coordinator is moving on, I believe. I forget exactly where he's going, but their defensive coordinator moving on. They had a lot of guys graduate and turn out. So next year could be a little bit of a down year for Oklahoma State. You know, we usually see that this is a team that's in it. But once they've got to kind of replace their quarterback, once they've kind of got to go through this rebuild season, I think last year was their chance, and next year should be a little bit more disappointing. I do want to hit on some lowlights, though, namely TCU. Namely TCU.
Yeah. We both Horned Frogs are pretty rough to watch.
We both pay attention a little more than most people to TCU football because obviously we are fans. But any season where your 20-plus year head coach gets fired, and he didn't technically get fired, but I think we all kind of agree that he was essentially fired.
Lightly pushed out.
And now Gary Patterson's a special assistant at Texas. So tear down the statue there. But Jack, talk about some of your lowlights. Hit on TCU.
First of all, I'm going to say this. The dichotomy of Gary Patterson is that on one side, you have a coach that built a program from a very meaningless and nothing school and a meaningless and nothing conference into conference champions, Rose Bowl champions, and Big 12 champions, which to do that in the relatively short amount of time is incredibly impressive and deserves praise. Absolutely. TCU post like 2016 was pretty sad. But then again, to have like 4 bad years in a row after like 16 pretty good ones, I get that's still not like a good thing. I mean, I'm not saying that's a thing we should let slide, but it is something more understandable to someone. So I do get that Gary Patterson did infinitely more good for TCU than anything negative. But even with that, the last couple seasons were indeed very poor, and we should not be that bad. So I get that is a difference. So I understand that. But at the end of the day, it was his time to go. I do think it is sad. And yes, while there is going to be, I get the logical, fair, whatever argument is going to be, oh, well, you know, he's going to Texas and he can do whatever he wants and he's earned his stripes. He can do whatever. That's all true, but I don't really care when it's Texas. I really don't. Like, even he could have any job he wants and all that's great. And yeah, I'm not mocking him as a human being. I really don't care that much. But anytime you leave your school to go to a rival school, it is a gross feeling, and I do hate that. And I think that most fans would say that because that's a fair thing to think when your main coach leaves for a team that you hate. So I think especially the team that he had fathered for so many years. So it's like I don't like it, but I get it.
I think a lot of it has to do with Chris Del Conte, who is now the AD at Texas, formerly the AD at TCU, had a really good relationship with Gary Patterson, and that's kind of how we found out about that Gary Patterson was going to Texas before it was announced. Was we saw Gary Patterson in a Longhorns shirt at a game in a box with Chris Del Conte. But I'll say this: props to Donati. Whether Sonny Dykes works out or not, they went and got their guy. They got him quick, preserved the signing class, and got a really good haul in terms of coaching staff that he brought over him,
and transfers,
and transfers. I think we could see. Not even could. I think we're going to see a different kind of TCU team next year. Now, whether that team has the defensive facilities of SMU in the past few years, that's an entirely different question.
More screens.
No more jet sweeps. No more jet sweeps.
Sonny Cumbie is weeping.
Yeah, somewhere Doug Meacham is crying in a hole watching old Darius Davis jet sweep films.
But last note on the Big 12, this conference did have 3 top 10 teams, but I'm not going to lie, you could have fooled me. I really do think it's interesting how this conference had 3 top 10 teams and everyone else was either mediocre or pretty bad. Mind you, Texas was 5-7. It was a joke, and they were – 2 or 3 spots out of the top 10 teams, side of the Big 12, which is kind of sad. Yeah. So, Texas sucked this year. We didn't talk about it a lot, but there wasn't really much to say. Texas lost to Kansas. Never forget. Never forget that Texas lost to Kansas, which was
at
awesome.
Home.
So, at home, which was probably that was to me the greatest game of the year, easily. That was the best game of the year. I would watch that entire game back. But to a conference that had less incompetency abound was the Big Ten, which they have been through some interesting things over the last few years, and most notably last season with giving Ohio State a free get into the championship game pass because their name is Ohio State. And this season, the free pass did not count, which was great, and Ohio State did not go to the Big Ten championship game, which was pretty shocking because Michigan decided to finally have a really good season. Still ended a loss, but still a very good season. I'm not going to knock Michigan, so I will give them that. So one heck of a season that Michigan had. Michigan State had a way better season than we thought. Mel Tucker really getting things done in East Lansing. But kind of once again, the same problem in the Big Ten East. You have 3 top 10 teams that are pretty good teams, and then you have 4 pretty bad teams, or at least 3 bad teams and 1 massively underwhelming team. And then the West is kind of the same thing where you have a lot of – they're good teams like Purdue, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. They're good, but that's about it. And then Illinois was average, and Nebraska, Northwestern were a joke. So a very strange conference.
I need a surrender punt index. If you're not familiar with the surrender punt index, there is an account on Twitter that tracks every punt and its index on the surrender punt index, which just basically tells you how cowardly of a punt it is. So, punting from the opponent's 40-yard line will get you a pretty high reading on the surrender punt index. I need it for Iowa. I need the surrender punt index for Iowa because they had
probably horrific
all-time surrender punts, 4th and 2 from the opponent's 42-yard line. Just some atrocious 4th and 1s. Iowa was easily the most infuriating, sort of good team to watch this year. There were certainly some other lowlights, but one of my lowlights was just watching Iowa play football. Even though they were good, it was the most infuriating thing to watch. When Iowa wins these 16-13 games, we talked about all year. A recurring theme was Big Ten football, and Big Ten football.
You want to stat with that about Big Ten football? There were 4 teams. There were 4 teams in the Big 12 that surpassed 300 points, which were Oklahoma State, unsurprisingly, Oklahoma, unsurprisingly, Iowa State, And then actually Texas, even though Texas got outscored, Texas allowed 315 points, which was awful. Second worst to Kansas by about 50, which, oh God, Kansas. Kansas got outscored 391 to 177, which is, wow, that's bad. But getting outscored by 200 points in 12 games, which is just depressing. But 4 teams out of a 10 possible. Big Ten has 14 possible teams. Guess how many scored above 300? It's not 0.
2.
You are correct. And those would be Ohio State with a pretty impressive 418, and then Michigan with 307. Indiana scored 94 points. Kansas scored 80 more. 80. Kansas. Like, how is it possible?
Well, a lot of that was due to the 50 burger.
UMass scored 196. UConn scored 187.
I don't understand what happened to Indiana this year.
UMass scored over twice the amount of points, and it's UMass. Oh, God, no, it was a joke. This was a very depressing team to watch. Indiana's fall off was shocking. I mean, not like as in it was massive surprise, more like just simply the fact they went from being actually pretty good to being really bad in a really short amount of time. It's just sort of sad to see. So that's more what I mean. But yeah, my lowlights are going to be the teams you think, which is going to be Northwestern, Indiana, of course. But I'm going to have to go Penn State too. I'm not going to let Penn State slide on here because once again, you had big expectations, and once again, you could not get anywhere close to winning the Big Ten East. In fact, you finished 4th, which is pretty bad. Going 4-5, and Penn State again, they had a solid start, but the Auburn loss really hurt them. And just
no, they beat Auburn. They beat Auburn.
Sorry. I mixed that up. It was
Illinois.
It was when they had that. Yeah, it was that insane triple overtime game. I forgot about that. But yeah, those kind of games are just going to kill you, and it's disappointing to see. I mean,
but shout out to James Franklin. Shout out to James Franklin for going 7-6 and securing an absolute bag on an extension.
Hall of Fame agent right there. Hall of
Fame agent.
Easy.
Because James Franklin is in every coaching carousel rumor and then gets paid after a 7-6 year. I think a lot of this had to do with Sean Clifford getting hurt. If they never lose at Iowa, you can wonder, what happens with the rest of their season. But this was a team, they had a lot of young talent, a lot of guys who were a little bit unproven, and eventually it just kind of fell off the wagon as the season went along. I want to bring on another low light. It wasn't necessarily a low light, but Wisconsin, because the record still stands that Graham Mertz has never beaten a ranked team, but is undefeated against unranked teams.
That's kind of wild that that's a fact.
It's the greatest betting trend of all time. I know what to bet on every Ohio State.
But watch out. Game. Watch out for the Badgers next season, where they have Illinois State, Washington State, and New Mexico State to start their season off.
A little bit lighter schedule than playing Notre Dame, huh?
But, which actually I am looking forward to, the first tough game immediately following those 3 games is at Ohio State. So we will very much determine how good Wisconsin is very quickly. And then you have Illinois and Northwestern after that. So your first 6 games, if you don't win 5 of them, you're terrible. You have to win 5. Northwestern, Illinois, and then basically 3 pretty easy. That's 5 not hard games in your first 6. And then 1 hard one. No, if you're Wisconsin, you don't go to a bowl game, which, I mean, they're going to go to a bowl game. But, like, if you don't get at least, I mean, at what, like 8-9 wins out of that? I mean, come on. So we'll see how Wisconsin does next year. We'll obviously have previews out in kind of a while, but we'll have them out eventually when the season gets back around. We now get to the epitome of failure in college football, which is, guess what? The Pac-12. The Pac-12 has been disappointing year in, year out. This season was quite bizarre, but they did have one shining star among them all, which I will give them credit. But the one team that I'm not going to bash at all today is the Utah Utes, a team that kind of came out of nowhere and a team that went through a lot, to say the least. 2 different players on Utah had died this last year, which I could not imagine how difficult that is to have 2 different teammates on the football team together have to pass that early, which is just sort of, unbelievable to even think about that. So I'm actually going to look up the 2 players, but the 2 of them was Aaron Lowe, who was 21 years old, was shot to death, and also Ty Jordan, who also was shot. He died in a day after Christmas. Was self-inflicted, but it was accidental. So really, really horrible news. Of course, those were back then. Aaron Lowe was actually earlier. That was on October 13th, 2021. It happened late September. So yeah, again, really, really terrible stuff for that team. And to be able to go through both of those events and still come out as not only a good team, but pretty solidly the best team in your conference and win the conference championship was really, really cool to see. So big credit to Utah for what was an incredibly successful season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all kind of, Utah at the beginning of every year is kind of like, well, they could do it. They're in the Pac-12. They actually did it this season, and they did it to the tune of kicking Oregon's ass twice, hanging 38 on them twice.
And they play at Oregon second to last week of the season this coming year, and they also play at Florida State and at UCLA and San Diego State. So they got some interesting games on that.
And Oregon is going through a head coaching change. So you look at the outlook of the Pac-12, and really you expect that USC is going to be better, obviously, bringing in Lincoln Riley.
They will improve, yeah.
But Utah has consistently been able to do some damage in the Pac-12. And huge shout out to them. I really think, I know you had Oregon State on the highlights, but I think that's more of a relative highlight compared
it's
to
relative
the Pac-12, because there were a lot of lowlights in the Pac-12. USC.
I give Oregon the credit because they had incredibly little to work with, and Oregon State. But Oregon State had basically nothing to work with. They were in complete shambles, and yet they were able to put together a season that actually really wasn't that bad. So I get they lost their bowl game too. I know, but I just give them credit because Oregon State was able to pull off some pretty impressive wins, and they were supposed to have a horrific season and end up having an average one. So I just wanted to give them a shout out because I've been sort of on their train most of the year.
Yeah, I think as far as the lowlights go, USC is the obvious one, but they're going through a coaching change. I think it was good for USC because it finally gave them a legitimate reason to get Clay Helton out of there, which they've been looking for years. So getting Clay Helton out is a win. Obviously, the season overall was a loss. Arizona going 1-11, and I'm shocked they even won a game, Jack.
No, I actually have a worse team. Washington is almost more of a joke to me than Arizona, because Washington was a top 15 team preseason
and lost to Montana
in game 1. You start your season off, and they went 4-8. They lost 4 games in a row to end the season. I get Stanford also lost 7 in a row to end the season after starting 3-2, so that also is pretty awful. But no, I mean, obviously Arizona was a worse team than Washington, and Arizona was like borderline, like not even good enough to be in the Pac-12. But listen to this. These are Arizona's first 3 games next season. First 3 games. At San Diego State, loss. Mississippi State at home, probably a loss. North Dakota State.
Oh, no. No, you want. I promise you.
Oh, no.
If you are a middling to bottom tier team in your conference and you think it's a good idea to play the Bison of North Dakota State, you are mistaken. Horrible decision. This is a great opportunity next season for North Dakota State. I can't wait to watch that game and bet North Dakota State because that's going to be quite awesome.
Their two games against the North Division are against Washington State and Washington, which is easier, mind you, but as this team might not win a game.
But wrapping the Pac-12, I think we can nicely put a bow on the fact that the Pac-12 is still the Pac-12.
1-4 in bowl games.
As much grief as we give the ACC, the Pac-12 was clearly, I think, the worst of the two conferences this year in terms of snatching up that bottom spot in the Power Five. Obviously, ACC didn't get in a playoff team either, but I think for the Pac-12, I mean, it's USC or bust at this point because Oregon's going through a small rebuild. We've seen what Utah can do in their best years, and it's still not up to playoff standards. USC is really the best hope for this conference going forward. And I think getting Lincoln Riley in the Pac-12 was a huge win for the conference. Might have saved them as conference realignment starts to come.
Yeah, which we're going to get into that more when we get into college football restarting next year. But there's going to be a lot of change. Some FCS teams moving up, lots of teams moving around. So and obviously that'll be more carried over into 2023, but we'll get that going as it goes along. But we can get our final Power 5 conference in, which will be, of course, the SEC. With the SEC having a season that, yes, I'm going to rip on the SEC some because everyone talks about it like you can't touch it ever. And I'm going to talk about it. But starting things off, the top half of the SEC, top third of the SEC, was pretty solid to pretty good. They could beat most teams, if not nearly every team. The top two were by far and away the best two teams in the country. A lot of okay teams. And then the bottom of the SEC was about the worst you could see. So out of those, Florida was a joke. Vanderbilt was horrendous. South Carolina was painfully average. Missouri was painfully average. LSU was pretty bad. Auburn was irrelevant. And Mississippi State and A&M were just sort of weirdly middling. And then you have, of course, Georgia and Alabama at the top. Kentucky had overperforming season. Arkansas had a great first half and ending, but not very good middle for overall a pretty good year. And then Ole Miss put together finally a non-terrible defense and an offense that actually scored a lot less than I thought. They only scored 246 points, which I would have thought they would have scored more. But yeah, for Ole Miss, it is that's looking, my bad. I'm looking at the conference score. They had 438 points. But yeah, it was sort of a strange year for the SEC, kind of like last year where it's sort of your best teams are going to be nationally among the best and your middling teams are just sort of going to be average and your bad teams are going to be among the worst. So they're not all gods on Mount Olympus.
I think what we really saw in the SEC is some of the middle-class teams start to figure it out. And by figure it out, I mean it looks like these teams have their coach locked down, and that's going to be a good thing for them going forward. I want to give a shout out to Arkansas, who no one saw coming in the SEC prior to this year, but Sam Pittman has things looking in the right direction there. They've got some talent coming in. They obviously have some talent leaving like Treylon Burks, but I think it is sustainable for Arkansas to kind of keep up this standard of being competitive, getting an upset or two in there, and yet not being at the top of the conference, because the top of the conference is going to be Bama and Georgia going forward. Until someone recruits on the same level, looking at you, Texas A&M, until someone recruits on the same level and can put it together on the field, it's going to be
key
Bama.
Side note.
But
key side note is that A&M is going to improve from 8-4 to 9-3.
Yeah, all that
with the team full of 5 stars.
$30 million best recruiting class of all time with 7 5-stars. Yeah, they're gonna go 9-3 because this is Jimbo Fisher, and what else do we expect? A couple other teams I wanted to shout out. Tennessee putting it together. And they lost some heartbreakers, but at least we got the offense rolling now. Believe in Josh Heupel, Hendon Hooker coming back next year. Next year could
believe
be
in the mustard thrown on the field.
Believe in the Vols. And I wanted to shout out Kentucky because Kentucky went 10-3. And that's, you might as well have won a national championship if you go 10-3 at Kentucky. So props to Mark Stoops there for getting a lot of wins. And obviously he avoided a lot of the better teams in the SEC, and didn't look competitive against Georgia whatsoever. But
they have to play at Ole Miss and against Mississippi State next year. Those are their West opponents.
That's not bad. That's not bad for them.
Without Matt Corral, yeah, I mean that could be shout out Matt Corral for one heck of a season, but before getting injured. But yeah, pretty good. But now to the rest of the G5 teams. That will include a whole lot of teams that had a lot of great success. The big highlights here are Cincinnati, pretty obviously for making the football glass ceiling of G5 teams make the playoffs. Houston had a great season despite losing to Texas Tech to open the year. And actually, I think they would have had a very different season if they didn't blow that game. Still lost Cincinnati anyway, but Houston had a really, really solid year. They were a great team. UTSA, of course, were kind of like this year's Coastal Carolina, who, by the way, fell off very hard. But yeah, they had a very, very solid year. UTSA, probably the best year in their existence, ended up going, what was their final tally? UTSA went 12-2, 7-1, blew a really dumb game to North Texas at the end of the year. I don't know what happened there, but they were pretty solid over the year. Utah State was kind of a surprise late in the season. They had a very solid year in the Mountain West Conference, as well as Air Force. And then San Diego State and Fresno State also both got double-digit wins. San Diego State was a very good team, beat UTSA to end the season. And then also Louisiana was ranked the majority of the year. They had a very successful year in the Sun Belt. They actually finished 16th. Yeah, Louisiana Raging Cajuns, 16th in the country to finish the year. They had a really solid season, 13-1 overall. They won 13 games in a row to end the season, which, yes, if you were wondering, is the best active win streak in college football right now. 13 straight wins in a row for the Raging Cajuns. Nobody's even close to that, actually.
Yeah.
In fact, the longest win streak I can find that's anywhere near that length is Clemson had a 6-game win streak to end the year, and not even Georgia because they lost the late game. So, because of course that was to Alabama. So, gotta shout them out. They've had a lot of good success these last couple of years. So, good for you, Louisiana.
Yeah, the only other one that I wanted to put on here was Fresno State. My lasting impression of the season is the electric late night game between UCLA and Fresno State, where awesome. I live bet the hell out of Fresno State, and they ended up coming back to win in the fourth quarter with one of the better performances I've seen in recent history from Jake Haener in that fourth quarter there.
And they play this year, to note on it, Fresno State this next season plays at USC.
However, losing your head coach and your starting quarterback is not going to help you much against Lincoln Riley. So
still could be fun. Still could be fun.
Absolutely.
You never know.
Getting into some lowlights here. I know you had this on yours. Coastal Carolina was expected. They got all their returning production back. They got,
I don't know what happened.
quarterback and Grayson McCall back. They got their head coach back in Jamie Chadwell, even though he definitely had some better offers out there. And the season was kind of a dud for them. I mean, we weren't looking at playoffs.
I wouldn't say they still win 11-2. It was just they blew the important games when they needed to, but they weren't bad. They were still a very good team. They just couldn't put it together the games they needed to.
But in order to be relevant as a Sun Belt Conference team, and I say relevant in the general conversation, obviously relevant in Sun Belt is an entirely relatively different thing entirely. But in terms of the national conversation, you know, you got to be undefeated. You got to be carrying like one loss. And they didn't win their games that they needed to win. I remember watching them against App State, and App State kind of ran up and down the field on them. And then they weren't able to score really in the second half. So, yeah, I think Jamie Chadwell's coaching reputation took a little bit of a hit this year. Just bringing back as much as they did, not being able to do quite as much with it. But who are some of your other lowlights from the group of 5 teams? I know we've got some good content on here.
The other lowlights, Nevada. I had really high hopes for Nevada this season. I thought they were going to be a really, really solid team. They ended up going 8-5, 5-3, and that was with Carson Strong, who's going to be one of the better quarterback options for the NFL, and really still is a great quarterback. It's just I don't know what happened to their team this year. Ball State, a team that you're probably like, why would you highlight? Bless you. Why would you highlight Ball State? Who cares about Ball State? And while that is a very good point, because I don't know who cares about Ball State, but they went 6-7 and 4-4. And again, you may ask, why does that matter? Because Ball State won the MAC last year. The first time they've won the MAC in over 30 years. And then they go 6-7.
The MAC is always a shit show, though.
It's a complete
pick a name out of a hat.
It's not going to be a good name, but it's going to be a name, and it's going to be a random.
It's going to be a name.
You will pick a name out of the hat. And this year, the name that was randomly decided out of the hat was Northern Illinois, which actually usually is one of the winners here. Central Michigan almost made the title game. Just missed out on a tiebreaker with the Huskies. But yeah, Ball State was pretty pathetic this season. Shout out Bowling Green for going 4-8 and still beating Minnesota, which was pretty hilarious. So yeah, I won't forget that, Minnesota fans. And then of course, the most hilarious options on this list are UConn/UMass, because they both deserve a spot here, because they both went 1-11, and one of those 2 wins was against the other team. So
game of the year, game of the year between UConn and UMass. I'm not going to say the name.
I'm not going to say
it. We got to bring it back year after year. That's all I'm going to say. Like, we have to bring it back. It's a great joke. The jokes write themselves at this point.
I think it should happen every year. I think there should be. I don't even know why that there's a rivalry here, but they've played each other 75 times. Okay, 1 second. I gotta pull this up. This is just looking them up. This is the most innocent thing. I'm just looking them up. I swear. I just looked up UConn UMass football rivalry. I was like, and I'm like simply like, let's have a look at
also
UConn
known as
versus UMass.
Wait! I need you to go
what
up.
Great statistic.
I need you to go up. Zoom out. This is on Wikipedia.
No way.
It's on Wikipedia.
There's no way that's on Wikipedia.
Well, the thing is,
known.
Wikipedia mods do not care at all. And the logos line up perfectly on the page.
Look at this sentence. Like, how meta is this? Oh God.
We're living in a simulation.
Although the nickname may be explicit, the school's fans were quick to get behind the popular phrase, despite mockery. They have although and despite. They're like, don't get it wrong.
Yeah. There are a lot of disclaimers in there.
I mean, to be fair, it's a pretty back and forth rivalry. Oh, yes. Yes. We're getting a 76th edition.
Yes.
Yes. We are getting another game. I can tell you what, I will probably not be in the Northeast for this amount of time, but I'm just saying, if I happen to be up here, you know where I'm going to be this fall.
I'm a little bit sad that I didn't go to the UConn Vanderbilt game, which was you couldn't sell a ticket for that game. Like, you would have to pay someone to take your ticket for that game.
Last team I'll mention before we wrap. Last one on here because I didn't want this team to escape us. But you know how we just bullied UMass and UMass and UConn for going 1-11. There was another 1-11 team, and that was the Florida International Panthers, the only other team to go 1-11 this season. 1-5 at home, 0-6 on the road. They're on an 11-game losing streak, which it's just to look at this football team. And I know we have to go, but this is my last thing here. The Florida International football team, which you'd think having international with everything, they would at least be somewhat decent. But apparently being international, they forgot how to play the sport of football, which does tend to hurt odds of winning a football game. This team was only founded in 2002, which is saying something. But, it was Butch Davis, their head coach, who they actually fired. He had a 5-year tenure. And unsurprisingly, they said, please leave. Dear God, please leave. In 2022, they played Texas State, New Mexico State, and, which is the reason why I brought them up, Florida International, who went 1-11, plays UConn next year. So we will have a UConn-Florida Atlantic game and a battle of the 1-11. So I'm just saying, you can book that on your calendar for another epic clash of titans in the football industry. So...
As far as I can tell, I believe they have the third or fourth. Well, I don't see. I got to look at UMass UMass and UConn were way worse. They are in the top 10 of worst point differential, getting outscored by 200 plus points. There are not many teams that can boast that reputation. However, that was before I looked at the point differential of UMass and UConn, which just blows it out of the water because they're getting outscored by like 400 points on the season.
You only played 12 games.
A true rivalry is the point differential bowl, and who can just escape having the worst point differential in college football.
My favorite rivalry in college football is UConn fans and the will to live. That's got to be my favorite.
UConn has fans? Since when? They're barely a football program.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just making up words.
It's women's basketball season. Come on.
Unironically, it is.
It is actually.
They lost a conference game for the first time since 2013 this week.
I saw that.
That is absurd. Talk about a dynasty. Jeez.
But if that does it for you, Jack, that'll do it for me. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Blanket Coverage Podcast. We will be back this weekend with some Super Bowl content, and we'll be back next week wrapping the Super Bowl, getting into some trade deadline talk. I want to talk about that a little bit tomorrow as well because we had the James Harden-Ben Simmons trade. Obviously, I have a lot of thoughts about
I have a lot of memes about it, so we have
that happen, and yeah, it works out perfectly. But once again, thanks so much for listening. I'm Noah Parker,
and I'm Jack Wallace. Peace out,
y'all.